Today we are finally talking about the Acro P2, and big thank you to Tag Firearms who helped make this possible. I was able to snag one from them in their most recent drop where they had a few of them in there along with a bunch of other things. So big thank you to Tag Firearms, who are also a sponsor of this channel, and goonlife saves you some money there. So I want to talk about, is this optic, is it a hit or is it all just hype, right? Because there's been so much build up to it and so many questions of like, hey, is it going to be that much better than the P1? Is it going to fix all the things we've worried about? Is it going to be better than the 509T or the SRO or even the RMR? And so we're going to talk, is it a hit or is it hype? But before we get into specifics about the optic, I want to give credit to some people who helped make this happen. Obviously, Tag Firearms were a big part in that. They provided the optic so that I could get a review done on this, put some content out for you guys. So big thank you to them. Also, big thank you to TRIARC Systems, who let me borrow their T&E gun, their Tri-11. That gun was on loan. Some of you saw the photos and some of the video from when we did our averages challenge in our training day. And so it gave me some initial impressions on it, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But thank you to them for letting me borrow that gun for the little time that I had it. But as T&E guns go, they needed it back for other things. So Tag was able to source me a staccato that they had over at Vulcan before it got cut for stack ports. They said, hey, put the Acro in there, finish out the review, and take care of it. And shout out to Jeremy at Vulcan Machine Works, who did the optic cut on both the staccato and the Tri-11 through centrifuge. So if you're looking at an Acro, if you're looking at an optic cut, a direct mount optic cut, hit up Vulcan Machine Works. And then lastly, thank you to Big Tex Outdoors, who gave me an opportunity to train with Chuck Pressburg at Press Check Consulting at his no-fail pistol course down in Conroe, Texas at their Big Tex range. So big thank you to them. And Big Tex is awesome. They treat me like family every time I'm down there. So big thank you to Josh, Justin, Matt, Chris, Jake, Ike, Ian, all of you guys. I know I'm leaving out a bunch of you. They have a whole crew there. Thank you guys for taking such good care of me when I go down there. And thank you for the opportunity to take Chuck's course. And thank you to Chuck for his course. But the course, what it offered me was the opportunity to get a lot of rounds down range behind this optic to give me a good idea of how it's going to perform through that round count. So now this optic has between 1,500 and 2,000 rounds across two guns. And how it's going to hold up to, you know, that pace of firing. So I was able to get a lot of shooting in behind this in a very short amount of time because of all of those people. So thank you to all of them. I will link all of those brands down below. But let's get back to what you're here for, which is the Acro P2. In the previous video that I did of my two favorite RDS optics, we had the SRO, which I have on my Tri-11 Commander, and then we have the Holosun 509T. And these two are still, I think, two of the better optics on the market. So if you're looking for something that is better than an RMR, I would say probably take one of these. But as I explained in that video, there are some caveats where you may still need to or want to run an RMR. So I would suggest going back and watching that, then coming back here. So because a lot of what I'm going to talk about here goes back to that. So getting into the Acro P2. Does it solve the problems that we saw with the P1, and does it solve the problems that we saw with the RMR? So we talked about how people wanted a larger window than the RMR, that we wanted an easier to access battery, we wanted similar or better battery life, we wanted less blue tint, less distortion in the window, we wanted closed emitter. Those were all the things we were looking for, and I can tell you up front, the Acro gives you all those things. Now there still are some caveats that we will talk about at the end, but the P2 does give you all those things. So right off the bat, one of the things that's kind of deceiving is that the window actually looks smaller when you look at it, but I think it's because the housing is so thick around the edges that it makes it look like it's a tiny window. But in reality, what you see through the window is actually larger than what you see through the RMR. So it does give us a larger window. Now, it's not as large a window as the 509, nor is it as large a window as the SRO. So if you are a competitive shooter and you want just absolute largest window you can get, and you're not, you know, banging this thing around off of cars or things like that, and if it breaks, whatever, because it's just a competition gun, the SRO would probably still be better because you have that large window to be able to track your dot from target transitions or through rapid fire, whatever it is. But if you want a more duty centered, or if you want that closed emitter, 509 or now the P2 is going to be better. So the P2 also now gives us a better battery with the 2032 versus, I forgot what they had in the P1, but much better battery life. Now it says up to 5 years at the certain setting. I don't have 5 years to test this. So what I've done is I've had it for about a month. I've had it near max brightness and it's been on and I've had no issues with battery, haven't turned it off, haven't dimmed it down. I mean, it's gone down, but never below the halfway point as far as brightness goes. So it's always been up in that higher level of, or higher brightness level. And I've had no issues with battery so far. And we know that with the P1s, they were kind of like around a month, some less than that. And that's with turning them off and then changing them regularly. So obviously much better battery life so far out of it. Again, this will vary depending on once more users have them out in the wild and they're running them and they're pushing them in different settings, then we'll have a better idea of what this actually looks like usability. But I think that you're still gonna get similar to RMR performance out of these. And I think it's a better option. And we do get these side battery doors. So that is an improvement, again, over the RMR. One of the complaints people had about the RMR was that you have to take the optic off to change the battery. We don't have, so just like the 509 with the side tray and then the SRO with the top cap, we have it on the side. Super easy to get off, super easy to change. And then you have your windage and your elevation turrets, top and bottom. They have the little Torx bit in there, or you can use the traditional Aimpoint tool. I do prefer the ones that have the kind of like flat head, similar to the RMR, because you can just take a shell casing and change it. With these, you actually have to have the tool for it. So some people may see that as a pro, some people may see it as a con. The housing is also milled out a little bit more, so it's a little bit more attractive, still have that tactical mailbox look to it. And then you have your tactile buttons on the side. Now, it does have a 3.5 MOA dot, but I will say, from my experience using it, and then everybody I've given the optic to or given the gun to, I say, hey, check this out. It's a much cleaner dot. Now, I know they said they changed the emitter, and part of that is to help with the battery life, but I think part of that too is that it came out with a much cleaner, crisper dot. So one of the drawbacks to the RMR as of late for myself is that I started to get the phantom square around the dot, and some of you know what I'm talking about from the box around the emitter. And especially at in perfect lighting, like in the right light where the sun's coming in at a certain angle, you get this little phantom box that's around the emitter and it's glowing into the glass. So you not only have your dot, but you have this little box around it. And the other issue is that the dot isn't always super clean, and it's a little blurry for me with my astigmatism. Now, this is a personal thing, it's not for everybody, but if you wear glasses, if you have an astigmatism, if you have any kind of eyesight issues, that may be a big thing for you. I can tell you the Acro P2 is much, much cleaner. It doesn't feel like a 3.5 MOA dot. It feels smaller than that because of how clean and how clear it is. And what aids in that is also the glass clarity. So when I gave it to Brandon, 9-banger, I said, hey, shoot this, tell me what you think. Just take a look at the glass, let me know what you think. And his immediate reaction was, dude, this glass is so clear. It's very little distortion, little to no distortion. It's probably the closest I've been to a true 1-power with no distortion RDS on a pistol. I mean, it is very, very clear, very clean. The other thing too I will say is that, that I forgot to mention is that it does have less blue tint than the other optics. So again, much cleaner, much clearer. And when we put it out on target, it blows me away. And then going back to the others, like, man, it's so different. But that aids in helping see the dot more clearly. And so for me, what this ultimately means in performance is that because I see the dot more clearly, because I see the dot more crisp, because there's less distortion in the glass, I know that what I'm aiming at or what the dot is over is what I'm actually aiming at. If we have distortion, if we have an unclear or kind of blurry, or if you have that little asteroid tail, you may or may not be aiming at what you may be off by a little bit. And I can tell you immediately, shooting the Tri-11 with the Acro P2 on there, I had my best group on a B8 at 25 yards. Now I did have one flyer and that was just me, but that was my best group as far as like tightness goes that I had ever shot. First time I shot that gun, first time I shot the optic, and I was like, okay, maybe dry fire's been working, or maybe there's something to this optic. So one of the things that Chuck Pressburg said in his class is that the most important part about shooting is seeing. You can't shoot what you can't see. And I think that's one of the issues that I've run into with red dots, particularly on pistols, is that if they're not crisp, so the 509 was much cleaner for me, the center dot, because it's so fine, was much cleaner for me. So it was easier to aim, easier to put on target, and to be consistent about where I'm aiming. So since shooting this at Chuck Pressburg's class at No Fail Pistol, we shoot a lot of B8s, and we shoot a lot at 20 and 25 yards. And I can tell you, I had some of the best groups that I've ever shot And I attribute that largely to the Acro P2, of being able to see and knowing that what I'm aiming at is actually what I'm aiming at, and being consistent about putting it on target. So that was a confidence boost as well as performance enhancement for me personally, especially with the issues that I have with my eyesight. Now, in terms of durability, as you guys have heard me talk about again and again, no one test is gonna give us the full picture of how durable this optic is. We need more of them out in the wild. So as more people are running them, as more people use them, as more people beat them up, that will give us a better picture of how durable this optic really will or won't be. But everything that I've seen so far indicates that it will be a very durable optic with no issues. So I would say that the Acro P2 is gonna be a hit for a lot of people. Now, the only caveats, the only downside that I can see, aside from obviously getting them, right? Because there's just not a lot on the market right now, but that's just the status of the industry. I know people wanna complain and say, oh, well, TRIARC lead times. Oh, well, I can't get Acros. Oh, I can't get this or that. Look across the board, everybody has lead times. I was talking to guys from Nighthawk the other day, and I think they have like an 18 to 20 month lead time. So it's this way across the industry. So it is what it is. That's just the status of the economy that we're in right now. But I think the caveats, the drawbacks, the downsides to the Acro P2, one would be that you lose your rear sight. Now, it may not be as big a deal for some people. Now, when I was at Chuck's class, there was a guy there who was an incredible shooter. He's a JTAC, and he was in there just getting some training in. And he said, you know, he will always have backup irons on his pistols because in the case that he has to transition from rifle to pistol, and if his pistol dot goes down for whatever reason, he needs to have those irons. Now, that's personal preference. That's dependent on you, your job, your SOPs, whatever situation you're in. Having gone to some of Dano's classes, Dano at Centrifuge, there is a whole portion on how to shoot with occluded dots, whether it's a closed emitter, open emitter, and without being able to see your irons. So how do you shoot if your glass is obstructed, if it's cracked, if there's something covering it, if there's water on it, whatever. And how do we then use our natural point of aim? How do we use the housing of the optic? How do we use the design of the barrel and the gun to orient ourselves to put rounds on target in an accurate fashion? So there are some ways you can do it without iron sights. Is it as good as iron sights? Probably not, if I'm honest. But there are ways to go. But it all just depends on you and your situation. The other downside is going to be the way that it mounts. Now, again, back to what I said in the previous video with the 509, this is very similar because it is a better way to mount. Because as I said in that video, with the RMR and the SRO, with the two posts here, these bolts don't do well with deflection. So if you're racking this thing like this off of stuff, or if you're racking it off of cars or off of holsters a lot, eventually these will shear off. It's just going to happen. The screws were never designed to take that type of deflection. They're just holding it down this way. So eventually they will break. Now, if you have a good optic cut, like if you have a direct cut from somebody like Vulcan Machine Works, or you have a good plate, like a Forward Controls plate that has good recoil bosses in there, it's going to do well to help alleviate some of that stress. It'll just prolong it, so it'll last longer. But it's not indestructible. In the class, we did have somebody's RMR end up shooting off because I think one of the screws broke and the other one just backed out from the stress of it vibrating. So is it perfect? No. Is this a better option? Yes, but the problem is because of the size of it, the footprint, you lose that rear sight. So there's some guys who put the rear sight in front. Some of the plates from Staccato and Dawson will put a very skinny one in the back. Again, personal preference, but that optic mount is going to be kind of a hang up for some of you guys depending on what gun you have. You may have to run a plate on top of a plate like Mojo is doing on his Tri-11 and then have to file down the rear sights. If you have depending on what the gun is, they may or may not be able to optic cut it. I can tell you when it comes to 2011s, because I know a lot of you guys ask, with the Staccato, because of the rear sight they use, it puts it in a weird position where they have to cut the Acro a little bit lower, which it's fine. Personally, it's fine, it doesn't bother me, but it probably sits at a more optimal height on something like a Tri-11. So on the Centrifuge that I shot, it sits slightly higher, which means the front sight occludes the optic less. So you have more open glass in there that you can see through, which is probably a better height for most people. That's not to say either one is bad, but just keep that in mind when you're looking at guns. Probably something, if you want it a little bit higher, something like a Centrifuge direct cut for an Acro, or just Tri-11 in general, direct cut for an Acro is probably gonna sit at a better height. as opposed to a staccato iron sight. Now you can do the staccato with the plate, but again, you're running plate on a plate and it's sitting higher up, or they have just the one plate, but you're still running a plate sitting higher up. Direct mount's the way to go. Now, the last thing that I would say is probably the downside is the price, right? So we know availability is tough, and if you can find them, they're running for retail at like $600. So $599, I go off of retail because it's the only consistent baseline we can go off of. Because even though that's retail, I've seen them for sale for $650, $670, $700. And normally optics get cheaper and not necessarily more expensive. It just depends on the market. So for the price, is it worth it? Especially if you're running something like a Glock, you're now gonna have an optic that costs more than your Glock. So you have to determine for yourself, is it worth that investment? Now I will say, everything that has shown me so far that it would be a durable optic. So I think it'll probably be more durable than something like the 509, although I never had any personal issues with it, but a lot of other people did. Again, go watch that video. The SRO, we do know it has that weak spot. We just don't know where that weak spot is. And then the other downside to the SRO that we talked about in the video is that it does not work in duty holsters. So this is the STI, staccato, whatever holster through Safariland. And I've been running this in there and it works. Doesn't come out. I know Mojo's gonna say alien gear or whatever, but it locks up in there. I don't have any issues with it. I personally haven't had any issues. The downside is the hood will not cover. Now, you may say, well, it's a closed emitter, this isn't a big deal, but when you're shooting steel, you get spalling on steel, and sometimes that spalling comes back at you. And so the spalling actually came and hit the seal of the glass on the back of this optic. So now it has a cut through the seal on the outside. Had the hood been over it, it would have protected it, but it doesn't reach. There are some people making some prototypes to alleviate that, but just something to keep in mind. The other thing about like concealed, how does it fit concealed? So this is a QVO Tactical holster, and I know some of you guys asked about holsters in the past. They make my Supreme one as well. I'll put the link down in the description. I use this when I'm EDCing it, and you can see that's what it looks like compared to something like the SRO. So you can see the SRO actually, to me, it sticks out a little bit more. I don't know. You see how more in line this optic is with the top as opposed to the SRO. So I know people say the optic's bigger, it's gonna be bulkier, it's gonna stick out more, but because of how it's cut and how it sits on the slide, it actually sits lower and isn't so obstructive, doesn't create such a big, like pointy area when you're conceal carrying. And then Roger also makes outside the waistband holsters that you can run it in. So there you go. That is the Acro P2. I think it is a great option for most people. I do believe it is a hit. I think it's probably, all things considered, probably the best optic on the market for self-defense or duty. I still think the SRO is gonna be better for competition shooters if you're running something like carry optics, just because you have that large window. You just can't beat that. Yeah, if there's something I missed, something you feel like I left out, leave it in the comments down below. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe. Karate chop that bell so you get notified every time I upload a video, and I will see you guys in the next one.